Well, we didn't make it mandatory that you go to UFC games with Mel Gibson.
Are you telling me I can't go home?
You got to use some judgment here. I asked what the cost was, and you don't know. I take it.
A routine FBI jet question suddenly stunned Patel during the hearing, instantly shifting the entire room's energy in a way no one expected. The moment landed with brutal force as reactions broke out immediately, exposing rising tension in real time. What followed became an instant credibility test that everyone in the room felt.
On the weekend of March 7th, an FBI plane flew round trip from D.C. to Las Vegas, and you attended a UFC fight with Mel Gibson.
Kash Patel never thought what he's signing up for as the Senator Peter Welch took aim at his flying record. And the whole room laughed, not because the situation was genuinely funny, it was because the point was so direct and so obvious that there was no clean way to respond. In one sentence, the entire defense lost its strength. At that moment, the issue stopped being about a plane and became something much bigger. Credibility.
Bottom line here, you flew home to Las Vegas. There's nobody else in the FBI who gets paid. They have to pay their own way if they want to go home.
Now here is where things start to feel uncomfortable, because this entire jet controversy did not suddenly appear out of nowhere. Kash Patel had already built a public reputation around this exact issue. Before stepping into the role, he openly criticized how FBI leadership handled taxpayer-funded travel. On his podcast, he went after Christopher Wray, accusing him of using the FBI jet to move around the country in a way that felt excessive and disconnected from accountability.
There's a requisition or an effort to get another plane for the FBI that would cost about $72 million.
As you call it, is not my jet. We use it for operational needs. We use it for FTOX. We use it for HRT.
But that's the one you fly in, right?
This was not a one-time comment or a passing remark. It was a consistent theme in how he presented himself. He framed jet usage as a symbol of leadership losing touch with responsibility. At the same time, he positioned himself as someone who would bring discipline and restraint back into the system. That message resonated because it was simple and clear. It created an expectation that things would be different under his leadership. That expectation is exactly what makes the current situation stand out.
A hockey game in New York City with Wayne Gretzky, and Flight Tracker says the FBI jet took you to and from New York City, where you don't live, right?
When the timeline is laid out, it does not rely on speculation or interpretation. The details are specific. On March 7th, an FBI jet flew from Washington to Las Vegas, where Patel attended a UFC fight alongside Mel Gibson. On April 5th, another flight took him to New York City, a place where he does not live, for a hockey game with Wayne Gretzky. On April 12th, the pattern repeated again with a trip to Miami for another UFC event.
And on April 5th, you attended a hockey game in New York City. You don't live there, right?
No, I don't.
By the way, everyday FBI agents who are assigned in Washington don't get to fly home on a private jet.
Well, I have to use a private jet because Congress made it mandatory.
Okay.
Each trip, taken on its own, might be easy to explain away. Public officials travel, and not every trip is strictly operational. However, when these events are presented together, one after the other, the pattern becomes difficult to ignore. These were not isolated incidents tied to urgent official duties. They were repeated trips to high-profile events, all using the same government aircraft that had previously been criticized.
On the following weekend, you attended a UFC fight, a fight in Miami, also on the FBI jet, right?
That's correct.
This is where the tension begins to build, because the situation is no longer about whether the flights happen. The focus shifts to whether the standard that was once applied to others is still being applied consistently.
With the use of the private jet is use Andrews Air Force Base versus Reagan National as what the other directors have done to save the taxpayer dollars.
Patel does offer a defense, and it is important to acknowledge that part of it is factually correct. He explains that the FBI director is required to use secure government transportation. Given the security risks associated with the role, this policy makes sense. It ensures safety and control over travel arrangements, and it is not something unique to one individual. However, this is also where the argument starts to weaken.
Nobody else in the FBI who gets paid, they have to pay their own way if they want to go home, right? I mean, right?
Well, that's not accurate. Depending on where you're stationed, the FBI covers the bill to get home.
The requirement explains how the director must travel, but it does not explain the choice of destination. It sets the method, not the purpose. There is no rule that requires attendance at sporting events or personal appearances in cities unrelated to official duties. This distinction becomes critical because it shifts the discussion away from policy compliance and toward personal decision-making. The reaction in the room reflects that clarity. The laughter is not just a response to the phrasing, it signals that the underlying point has been understood.
Home. I love to go home, but I don't go home on a private jet.
What makes this moment even more significant is that the hearing did not begin with this level of tension. It started in a calm and measured way. Welch opened by talking about political violence, the importance of responsibility, and the need for leaders to maintain respect even in disagreement. His tone was steady and controlled, and there was no indication that the discussion would take such a sharp turn. That calm beginning is important because it makes the shift more noticeable.
Director Patel, at one point you made an announcement that the suspect was in custody. We got our man. It turned out that was not true. In fact, I think that was about 27 hours before the person now in custody was apprehended. Why did you make that statement?
Welch does not immediately move to the jet issue. Instead, he begins with something that appears smaller, but reveals a pattern. He brings up the statement where Patel said, "We got our man." At first, that statement sounded definitive and reassuring. However, it later turned out to be inaccurate, as it came nearly 27 hours before the actual suspect was taken into custody.
We have our man. That would suggest to the public that everybody can rest and relax and not then continue to provide information to local law enforcement and to you. Well, so that was a mistake.
Welch highlights the practical consequence of that statement. When the public believes a suspect has already been captured, they are less likely to provide information or assistance. This is not simply a matter of wording. It has a direct impact on ongoing investigations. Patel responds by focusing on the phrasing, explaining that he referred to a subject being in custody rather than the suspect. While this may be technically accurate, it does not fully address the effect of the message as it was understood by the public. This exchange introduces a pattern where explanations rely on precision, but do not fully resolve the concern being raised.
That you know who Brian Driscoll is, right?
Yes.
Welch then builds on this pattern by introducing the case of Brian Driscoll. He does not present it abruptly. Instead, he carefully outlines Driscoll's background.
He was commander of the FBI's hostage rescue team. That's a very prestigious and responsible position.
Over 18 years of service, leadership of the Newark office, command of the hostage rescue team, oversight of 55 SWAT teams, and recognition with a Medal of Valor. These details establish a clear picture of someone with a strong and respected record.
Driscoll got fired, right?
Again, that matter is under litigation, and the matter you referenced occurred before I was director.
Let's just keep it really narrow here. He's fired, right?
Yes, he was terminated.
And he has to be, there's somebody communicates to him that he's terminated, correct?
That's my job.
After setting that context, Welch reveals that Driscoll was terminated.
He got into trouble when Emil Bove demanded a list of FBI agents who investigated January 6th and was apprehensive that what did happen ultimately would happen, and that is those folks would get fired.
The contrast between the achievements and the outcome raises an immediate question about the reasoning behind that decision. Patel responds by referencing additional information and ongoing litigation, which limits what can be discussed publicly. While this may be procedurally valid, it does not provide a clear answer in the moment. Instead, it leaves the issue unresolved. By this stage, a broader pattern becomes visible. There are statements that require clarification, decisions that prompt further questions, and responses that provide partial explanations without fully addressing the concerns. This context is what makes the later discussion about the jet more impactful.
I would welcome you submitting to this committee the cost information about the jets that are under consideration. And according to our research, the specifications that are included in this request.
When the conversation returns to travel, it is no longer an isolated topic. It is part of a larger narrative about consistency and accountability. The exchange continues with Patel asking whether he is not allowed to go home, framing the issue in terms of fairness. Welch responds by keeping the comparison simple. He acknowledges the desire to go home, but points out that he does not do so using a government-funded private jet.
And you said you wanted to ground Chris Wray's private jet travel that he pays for with taxpayer dollars to hop around the country.
This comparison shifts the focus from policy to perspective. It highlights the difference between the privileges available to leadership and the realities faced by ordinary agents. Patel attempts to explain that some travel costs may be covered under certain circumstances, but this adds complexity without resolving the core issue.
So, what's the cost to the taxpayer for those 3 flights?
Well, I pay the commercial equivalent per the regs and the law. And so, just so you know, when you are comparing me to prior directors...
I asked what the cost was, and you don't know.
The discussion then turns to cost, one of the most direct aspects of the issue. Welch asks a simple question about how much these flights cost. Despite the simplicity of the question, a clear answer is not provided. Instead, the response focuses on paying the commercial equivalent and on reducing expenses through operational choices. At this point, it becomes clear that the jet itself is not the central issue. Government aircraft, security requirements, and official travel are all expected elements of the role. The real concern is consistency. That clarity is difficult to counter because it addresses the issue directly. The reaction in the room reflects that understanding. The laughter and the pause indicate that the point has been recognized, even without further elaboration. At that moment, the discussion moves beyond debate and becomes a matter of perception.